I dare you to fix me. I'm crossing the line again, falling.
Securities Regulation Code of 2000 in questions and answers. Language and state policy. How do you start the study of the SRC? Unlike most laws, one cannot immediately jump into the body of the Securities Regulation Code without familiarizing oneself early with the terms used in the law. Here are some of them. Securities Section 3.1. These are shares, participation, or interests in a corporation or in a commercial enterprise or profit-making venture, and evidenced by a certificate, contract, instrument, whether written or electronic in character. It includes shares of stock, bonds, debentures, notes, evidences of indebtedness, asset-backed securities, investment contracts, certificates of interest or participation in a profit-sharing agreement, certificates of deposit for a future subscription, fractional undivided interest in oil, gas, or other mineral rights, derivatives like options or warrants, certificates of assignment, certificates of participation, trust certificates, voting trust certificates, or similar instruments, proprietary or non-proprietary membership certificates in corporation, and other instruments as may in the future be determined by the Commission. The Revised Securities Act, Batas Pambansa Bilang 178 as amended, did not attempt to define the term securities but contented itself with an enumeration of the various securities included in the term. Issuer, Section 3.2. It is the originator, maker, obligor, or creator of the security. Securities statutes have been enacted principally to protect the investing public from unscrupulous issuers. Broker, Section 3.3. Any person engaged in the business of buying and selling securities for the account of others. Compare with dealer. Dealer, any person who buys and sells securities for his own account in the ordinary course of business. So, compare with broker. Clearing agency, a person whom acts as intermediary in making deliveries upon payment to effect settlement in securities transactions. Just like an exchange, it is the desire of the SEC that the clearing agency could develop into a self-regulatory organization. Exchange, Section 3.7. An organized marketplace or facility that brings together buyers and sellers and executes trades of securities and or commodities. Unlike the usual over-the-counter market, an exchange has a physical facility. Insider, Section 3.8. A very important term. An insider may be 1. The issuer, 2. A director or office or a person performing similar function or a person controlling the issuer, 3. A person whose relationship or former relationship to the issuer gives or gave him access to material information about the issuer or the security that is not generally available to the public. 4th, a government employee or director or office of an exchange, clearing agency, and or self-regulatory organization who has access to a material information about an issuer or a security that is not generally available to the public. Or 5th, a person who learned such information by communication from any of the foregoing insiders. One is not prohibited from being an insider. It is not a crime. It is a status. An insider starts to get into trouble when he acts upon the material non-public information he has and buys or sells shares or under Section 23 or 27.3 communicates such information to another knowing or having reason to believe that such person will likely buy or sell a security. The financial market. The Securities Regulation Code may be better understood if the environment in which it exists could be described briefly. The SRC deals with securities, and these securities are in general issued in financial markets. These markets are described below. Capital market are the places to go if you want to raise new money. Equity capital. For the investor, the stock market provides a variable return. Stock market, security plus shares of stock. Debt capital. For the lender, the money or the bond market provides a fixed return. Money market for short debts, that is, those normally maturing within 1 year from date of issuance. Security equals commercial papers. Bond market for long-term debts, that is, those normally maturing after a year from date of issuance. Security equals junk bonds. Non-capital markets are the places to go if you want to hedge or mitigate the risks attached to holding capital assets. Commodity market. The instruments traded in this market are not present assets like shares of stock, commercial papers, or bonds, but future contracts calling for delivery of an asset, such as agricultural products, metals, and financial instruments. For this reason, a commodity market is usually referred to as a future market. Security equals future contracts. Foreign exchange market. This market is an over-the-counter market conducted by international banks and does not have a central location. Security equals forward exchange contracts. Options market. It enables an investor to purchase an option, giving him the right to buy or sell a specific number of shares at a future date at a specific price. For the right, the investor either pays or receives money, but just like in a commodity market, the money involved is only a fraction of the market value of the shares concerned. Security equals call or put option. The Securities Regulation Code. What is the state policy that impelled the enactment of the Securities Regulation Code? The state policy that impelled the enactment of the Securities Regulation Code are the following: to establish a socially conscious free market that regulates itself. 2. Encourages the widest participation of ownership in enterprises. 3. Enhances the democratization of wealth. 4. Promotes the development of the capital market. 5. Protects investors. 6. Ensures full and fair disclosure about securities. 7. Minimizes, if not totally eliminate, insider trading and other fraudulent or manipulative devices and practices which creates distortions in the free market. The above also answers the questions: what is the principal purpose of laws and regulations governing securities in the Philippines? And what are the main purposes of the Securities Regulation Code? Now, what are the powers and functions of the Securities and Exchange Commission? The Commission shall have the powers and functions provided by the Securities Regulation Code. Presidential Decree Number 902-A, the Corporation Code, the Investment House, says the law, the Financing Company Act, and other existing laws. Pursuant thereto, the Commission shall have, among others, the following powers and functions. 1. Have jurisdiction and supervision over all corporations, partnerships, or associations who are the grantees of primary franchises and or a license or permit issued by the government. 2. Formulate policies and recommendations on issues concerning the securities market. Advise Congress and other government agencies on all aspects of the securities market and propose legislation and amendments thereto. 3. Approve, reject, suspend, revoke, or require amendments to registration statements and registration and licensing applications. 4. Regulate, investigate, or supervise the activities of persons to ensure compliance. 5. Supervise, monitor, suspend, or take over the activities of exchanges, clearing agencies, and other SROs. 7. Impose sanctions for the violations of laws and the rules, regulations, and orders issued pursuant thereto. Next, prepare, approve, amend, or repeal rules, regulations, and orders, and issue options and provide guidance on and supervise compliance with such rules, regulations, and orders. Next, enlist the aid and support and or deputize all enforcement agencies of the government, civil or military, as well as any private institution, corporation, firm, association, or person in the implementation of its powers and functions under this code. Next, issue cease and desist orders to prevent fraud or injury to the investing public. Next, provide for contempt of the Commission, both direct and indirect, in accordance with the pertinent provisions of and penalties prescribed by the rules of court. Next, compel the officers of any registered corporation or association to call meetings of stockholders or members thereto, under its supervision. Next, issue subpoena duces tecum and summon witnesses to appear in any proceedings of the Commission, and in appropriate cases order the examination, search, and seizure of all the documents, papers, files, and records, tax returns, and books of accounts of any entity or person under investigation as may be necessary for the proper disposition of the cases before it, subject to the provisions of existing laws. Next, suspend or revoke, after proper notice and hearing, the franchise or certificate of registration of corporations, partnerships, or associations upon any of the grounds provided by law. And finally, exercise such other powers as may be provided by law, as well as those which may be implied from, or which are necessary or incidental to the carrying out of the expressed powers granted the Commission to achieve the objectives and purposes of these laws. What is a public company? Any corporation with a class of equity securities listed on an exchange or with assets in excess of 50 million pesos and having 200 or more holders, at least 200 of which are holding at least 100 shares of a class of its equity securities. What is a self-regulatory organization, or SRO? Self-regulatory organization. It is an organized exchange, registered clearing agency, and any organization or association registered as a self-regulatory organization under the provisions of the Securities Regulation Code to enforce compliance with relevant provisions of the code and rules and regulations adopted thereunder, and mandated to make and enforce its own rules, which have been approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission, by their members and or participants. What is an exchange? Exchange is an organized marketplace or facility that brings together buyers and sellers and executes trades of securities and or commodities. What is a fraudulent transaction? The purchase of sale of any securities to engage in any act, transaction, practice, or course of business which operates or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon any person. Fraud here is akin to bad faith, which implies a conscious and intentional design to do a wrongful act for dishonest purpose or moral obliquity. It is unlike that of the negative idea of negligence in that fraud or bad faith contemplates a state of mind affirmative operating with furtive objectives. What are considered as manipulative practices relative to securities trading? It shall be unlawful for any person acting for himself or through a dealer or broker, directly or indirectly, to create a false or misleading appearance of active trading in any listed security traded in an exchange or any other trading market, by effecting any transaction in such security which involves no change in the beneficial ownership thereof, by entering an order or orders for the purchase or sale of such security with the knowledge that a simultaneous order or orders of substantially the same size, time, or price for the sale or purchase of any such security has or will be entered by or for the same or different parties, or by performing similar acts where there is no change in beneficial ownership. To effect alone or with others a series of transactions in securities that raises their price to induce the purchase of a security, whether of the same or different class, of the same issuer, or to a controlled or commonly controlled company by others, depresses their price to induce the sale of a security, whether of the same or a different class, of the same issuer, or of a controlled or commonly controlled company by others, or creates active trading to induce such a purchase or sale through manipulative devices such as marking the close, painting the tape, squeezing the float, hype and dump, boiler room operations, and such other similar devices. To circulate or disseminate information that the price or any security listed in an exchange will or is likely to rise or fall because of manipulative market operations of any one or more persons conducted for the purpose of raising and depressing the price of the security for the purpose of inducing the purchase or sale of such security. To make false or misleading statement with respect to any material fact which he knew or had reasonable ground to believe was so false or misleading for the purpose of inducing the purchase or sale of any security listed or traded in an exchange. To effect, either alone or others, any series of transactions for the purchase and or sale of any security traded in an exchange for the purpose of pegging, fixing, or stabilizing the price of such security, unless otherwise allowed by the Securities Regulation Code or by rules of the SEC. What are some of the non-exclusive examples of types of prohibited conduct considered as manipulation of stock market prices? Painting the tape, engaging in a series of transactions in securities that are reportedly publicly to give the impression of activity or price movement in a security. Marking the close, buying and selling securities at the close of the market in an effort to alter the closing price of the security. Improper match orders, engaging in transactions where both the buy and sell orders are entered at the same time with the same price and quantity by different but colluding parties. Hype and dump, engaging in buying activity at increasingly higher prices and then selling securities in the market at a higher price. Wash sale, engaging in transactions in which there is no genuine change in actual ownership of a security. Squeezing the float, taking advantage of a shortage of securities in the market by controlling the demand side and exploiting market congestion, doing such shortages in a way to create artificial prices. Disseminating false or misleading market information through media, including the internet or any other means to move the price of a security in a direction that is favorable to a position held or a transaction. Who is an insider? It's the issuer, director, officer, or a person controlled by, or under common control with the issuer. 3. A person whose relationship or former relationship to the issuer gives or gave him access to a fact of special significance about the issuer, or the security that is not generally available, or a person who learns such a fact from any of the foregoing insiders with knowledge that the person from whom he learns the fact is such an insider. Who is a promoter? A promoter is a person who, acting alone or with others, takes initiative in founding and organizing the business or enterprise of the issuer and receives consideration thereof. Who is an underwriter? An underwriter is a person who guarantees on a firm commitment and or declared best effort basis the distribution and sale of securities of any kind by another company. What is prospectus? Prospectus is a document made by or on behalf of an issuer, underwriter, or dealer to sell or offer securities for sale to the public through a registration statement filed with the Commission. Who is a broker? A broker is a person engaged in the business of buying and selling securities for the account of others. Who is a dealer? A dealer means any person who buys and sells securities for his or her own account in the ordinary course of business. What is a fact of special significance? One in which addition to being material would be likely to affect the market price of a security to a significant extent on being made generally available. One which a reasonable person would consider especially important under the circumstances in determining his course of action in the light of such factors, has a degree of its specificity, the extent of its difference from information generally available previously in its nature and reliability. What are securities? These are shares, participation, or interests in a corporation or in a commercial enterprise or profit-making venture, and evidenced by a certificate, contract, instrument, whether written or electronic in character. Examples of securities are shares of stock, bonds, debentures, notes, evidences of indebtedness, asset-backed securities, investment contracts, certificates of interest or participation in a profit-sharing agreement, certificates of deposit for a future subscription, fractional undivided interest in oil, gas, or other mineral rights, derivatives like option and warrants, certificates of assignments, certificates of participation, trust certificates, voting trust certificates, or similar instruments, proprietary or non-proprietary membership certificates in corporations, and other instruments as may be in the future be determined by the Commission. What are over-the-counter securities? These are securities sold without passing through the stock exchange. Over-the-counter markets. Markets made or created for the purchase and sale of securities other than on a stock exchange. What is meant by the registration requirement for securities? The requirement that securities shall not be sold or offered for sale or distribution within the Philippines without a registration statement duly filed with and approved by the SEC. Prior to such sale, information on the securities in such form and with such substance as the SEC may prescribe shall be made available to each prospective purchaser. What are exempt securities? Those that do not require registration either because the law itself exempts them therefrom, or the Securities and Exchange Commission finds that the enforcement of the registration requirement is not necessary in the public interest and for the protection of the investors by reason of the amount involved or the limited character of the public offering. Examples of exempt securities are any security issued or guaranteed by the government of the Philippines or by any political subdivision or agency thereof, or by any person controlled or supervised by and acting as an instrumentality of said government. Any security issued or guaranteed by the government or any country with which the Philippines maintains diplomatic relations, or by any state, province, or political subdivision thereof on the basis of reciprocity, provided that the Commission may require compliance with the form and content of disclosures the Commission may prescribe. Certificates issued by a receiver or by a trustee in bankruptcy duly approved by the proper adjudicatory body. Any security or its derivatives, the sale or transfer of which by law is under the supervision and regulation of the Office of the Insurance Commission, Housing and Land Use Regulatory Board, or the Bureau of Internal Revenue. Any security issued by a bank except its own shares of stock. The Commission may, by rule or regulation after public hearing, add to the foregoing any class of securities if it finds that the enforcement of this code with respect to such securities is not necessary in the public interest and for the protection of the investors. What transactions are exempt? Sale of any security in any of the following transactions. At any judicial sale, A sale by an executor, administrator, guardian, or receiver or trustee in insolvency or bankruptcy. 2. By or for the account of a pledge holder, a mortgager, or any other similar lien holder, selling or offering for sale or delivery in the ordinary course of business, and not for the purpose of avoiding the provisions of this code, to liquidate a bona fide debt, a security pledged in good faith as security for such debt. 3. An isolated transaction in which any security is sold, offered for sale, subscription, or delivery by the owner thereof, or by his representative for the owner's account, such sale or offer for sale, subscription, or delivery not being made in the course of repeated and successive transactions of a like character by such owner, or on his account by such representative, and such owner of representative not being the underwriter of such security. Fourth, the distribution by a corporation actively engaged in the business authorized by its articles of incorporation of securities to its stockholders or other security holders as a stock dividends or other distribution out of surplus. 5. The sale of capital stock of a corporation to its own stockholders exclusively where no commission or other remuneration is paid or given directly or indirectly in connection with the sale of such capital stock. 6. The issuance of bonds or notes secured by mortgage upon real estate or tangible personal property, where the entire mortgage together with all the bonds or notes secured thereby are sold to a single purchaser at a single sale. 7. The issue and delivery of any security in exchange for any other security of the same issuer pursuant to a right of conversion entitling the holder of the security surrendered in exchange to make such conversion, provided that the security so surrendered has been registered under this code or was, when sold, exempt from the provision of this code, and that the security issued and delivered in exchange, if sold at the conversion price, would at the time of such conversion fall within the class of securities entitled to registration under this code. Upon such conversion, the par value change shall be deemed the price at which the securities issued and delivered in such exchange are sold. Next, brokers' transactions executed upon customer's order or any registered exchange or other trading market. Next, subscriptions for shares of the capital stock of a corporation prior to the incorporation thereof, or in pursuance to an increase in its authorized capital stock under the Corporation Code, when no expense is incurred, or no commission, compensation, or remuneration is paid or given in connection with the sale or disposition of such securities, and only when the purpose for soliciting, giving, or taking of such subscription is to comply with the requirements of such law as to the percentage of the capital stock of a corporation which should be subscribed before it can be registered and duly incorporated or its authorized capital increased. The exchange of securities by the issuer with its existing security holders exclusively where no commission or other remuneration is paid or given directly or indirectly for soliciting such exchange. The sale of securities by an issuer to fewer than 20 persons in the Philippines during the 12-month period. The sale of securities to any number of the following qualified buyers: bank, registered investment house, insurance company, pension fund or retirement plan maintained by the government of the Philippines or any political subdivision thereof, or managed by a bank or other persons authorized by the Bangko Sentral to engage in trust functions, investment company, or such other persons as the Commission may by rule determine as qualified buyers on the basis of such factors as financial sophistication, net worth, knowledge, and experience in financial and business matters, or amount of assets under management. What are the grounds for SEC to reject and revoke registration of securities? If SEC finds that the issuer has been judicially declared insolvent, has violated any of the provisions of the Securities Regulation Code, the rules promulgated pursuant thereto, or any orders of the SEC of which the issuer has notice in connection with the offering for which a registration statement has been filed, has been or engaged or is about to engage in fraudulent transactions, has made any false or misleading representation of material facts in any prospectus concerning the issuer or its securities, has failed to comply with any requirement that the SEC may impose as a condition for registration of the security for which the registration statement has been filed, or the registration statement is on its face incomplete or inaccurate in any material respect, or includes any untrue statement of a material fact, or omits to state a material fact required to be stated therein, or necessary to make the statements therein not misleading, or the issuer, any officer, director, or controlling person of the issuer, or person performing similar functions, or any underwriter has been convicted by a competent judicial or administrative body upon plea of guilty or otherwise of an offense involving moral turpitude and or fraud, or is enjoined or restrained by the SEC or other competent judicial or administrative body for violations of securities commodities and other related laws. What are the grounds for suspension of the registration of securities? The SEC may also suspend the right to sell and offer for sale such security pending further investigation by entering an order specifying the grounds for such action, or by notifying the issuer, underwriter, dealer, or broker known as participating in such offering. The SEC may also suspend, upon a refusal of the issuer upon order of the SEC to furnish such further information as may in its judgment be necessary to enable the SEC to ascertain whether the registration of such security should be revoked. If at any time the information contained in the registration statement filed is or has become misleading, incorrect, inadequate, or incomplete in any material respect, or the sale or offering for sale of the security registered thereunder may work or tend to work a fraud. Upon the issuance of any such order and notification to the issuer, underwriter, dealer, or broker known as participating in such offering, no further offer or sale of any such security shall be made until the same is lifted or set aside by the Commission. Otherwise, such sale shall be void. What is commodity futures contract? Commodity futures contract means a contract providing for the making or taking delivery at a prescribed time in the future, or a specific quantity and quality of a commodity, or the cash value thereof, which is customarily offset prior to the delivery date and includes standardized contracts having the indicia of commodities futures, commodity options, and commodity leverage or margin contracts. What is a commodity? A commodity means any goods, articles, services, rights, and interests, including any group or index of any of the foregoing in which commodity interest contracts are presently or in the future dealt in. What is a forward contract in commodity transactions? This is a contract between a buyer and a seller whereby the buyer is obligated to take delivery and the seller is obliged to make delivery of a fixed amount of an underlying commodity at a predetermined price and date. Payment in full is due at the time of delivery. What is a derivative? With respect to equity securities, a financial instrument, including options and warrants, whose value depends on the interest in or performance of an underlying security, which does not require any investment of principal in the underlying security. What are options? These are contracts that give the buyer the right but not the obligation to buy or sell an underlying security at a predetermined price, called the exercise or strike price, on or before a predetermined date, called the expiry date, which can only be extended in accordance with exchange rules. What is a strike price? The predetermined buying or selling price of underlying security under an option is a strike price. What is an expiry date? The predetermined date for buying or selling an underlying security under an option. What are the different kinds of options? A call option and a put option. What are call options? A contract that gives the buyer the right, but not the obligation to buy, an underlying security at a predetermined price on or before a predetermined date. What are put options? A contract that gives the seller the right, but not the obligation, to sell an underlying security at a predetermined price on or before a predetermined date. Put option is for the seller, call option is for the buyer. What is meant by a straddle? A straddle involves the purchase of an equal number of put options and call options on the same underlying security at the same strike price and maturity date. Such option may be exercised separately, although the combination of option is usually bought and sold as a unit. What is a block sale? A block sale shall mean a matched trade that does not go through the automated order matching system of an exchange trading system, but instead has been pre-arranged by and among the broker's dealers, a client, and is then entered as a done directly into the trading system. I really don't understand this actually. What are Chinese walls? The proper segregation of functions within a firm by any broker-dealer which assumes more than one function, whether as a dealer, advisor, or underwriter, or which engages in market-making transactions to prevent the flow of information between the different parts of its organization which perform each function, and any conflict of interest which may result. A broker-dealer shall at all times ensure that its trading functions and back-office settlement functions are properly segregated and shall establish written procedures to ensure compliance with this rule. Information. What is information? It is a specific nature which has not been made public and relating to one or more public companies or any securities of a public company, and which, if it were made public, would likely affect the market price of the securities. The IRR shall be interpreted in accordance with the purpose of the Securities Regulation Code as follows. Beneficial owner or beneficial ownership means any person who, directly or indirectly through any contract, arrangement, understanding, relationship, or otherwise has or shares voting power of such security and or investment returns, or power which includes the power to dispose of such security. Public company means any corporation with a class of equity securities listed on an exchange or with assets in excess of 50 million pesos and having 200 or more holders, at least 200 of which are holding 100 shares of a class of its equity securities. SRO means an organized exchange registered clearing agency, and any organization or association registered as a self-regulatory organization, or SRO. An investment contract means a contract, transaction, or scheme where a person invests his money in a common enterprise and is led to expect profits primarily from the effort of others. A presumption that a contract is an investment contract arises whenever a person seeks to use the money of others on the promise of profits. When two or more investors pool their resources, there is a common enterprise, even if the promoter does not do more than receive a broker's commission. Derivative with respect to equity securities means a financial instrument including options and warrants whose value depends on the interest in or performance of an underlying security, but which does not require any investment of principal in the underlying security. Options are contracts that give the buyer the right, but not the obligation to buy or sell an underlying security at a predetermined price, called the exercise or strike price, on or before a predetermined date, called the expiry date, which can only be extended in accordance with exchange rules. Call options are rights to buy and put options are rights to sell. Warrants are rights to subscribe or purchase a new share or existing shares in a company on or before a predetermined date called the expiry date, which can only be extended in accordance with exchange rules. So warrants are rights to subscribe or purchase new shares. Warrants generally have a longer exercise period than options. Options are contracts that give the buyer the right but not the obligation to buy or sell. Facility of an exchange includes systems, processes, or services, tangible or intangible property, whether or not in a specific physical location or in an exchange, for the purpose of effecting transactions between buyers and sellers in a securities trading market and conveying any information required by the participants to effect such transactions. What is a tender offer? It is a publicly announced intention by a person acting alone or in concert with other persons to acquire equity securities of a public company. What is the disclosure rule? All companies listed or applying for listing are required to divulge truthfully and accurately all material information about themselves and the securities they sell for protection of the investing public and under pain of administrative, criminal, and civil sanctions. Corporation A sold securities to B in Cagayan de Oro. The said transaction was not registered. Is the sale of the said securities valid? No. Section 8.1 of Security Regulation Code provides that securities shall not be sold or offered for sale or distribution within the Philippines without a registration statement duly filed with and approved by the SEC. In the preceding situation, will the said transaction contravene SRC if it happened in China? No. The prohibition can only be applied if the sale, offer, or distribution of unregistered securities took place in the Philippines. A sold his shares of stock in Corporation A to B, one of the stockholders. The said transaction was not registered to SEC. C contested and asserted that said transaction was not valid because the same was not registered. Is C correct? No. Section 10, letter E of SRC provides that the sale of capital stock of a corporation to its own stockholders exclusively is not required to be registered in SEC, provided that no commission or other remuneration is paid or given directly or indirectly in connection with the sale of such capital stock. Is a proxy made verbally valid? No. Proxies must be in writing, signed by the stockholder or his duly authorized representative, and filed before the scheduled meeting with the corporate secretary. What are the fraudulent transactions in connection with the purchase of securities? It shall be unlawful for any person, directly or indirectly in connection with the purchase or sale of any securities to 1. Employ any device, scheme, or artifice to defraud, obtain money or property by means of any untrue statement of a material fact, of any omission to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statements made, in the light of the circumstances under which they were made, not misleading, or engage in any act, transaction, practice, or course of business which operates or would operate as a fraud or deceit upon any person. Attorney B advised and persuaded A to sell the latter securities without registering the transaction to SEC. A sold the said securities to C. Is B liable under SRC? Yes. Under the SRC, it shall be unlawful for any person to aid, abet, counsel, command, induce, or procure any violation of this code, or any rule, regulation, or order of the Commission thereunder. Give a case where a person who is not an issuing corporation, director or officer thereof, or a person controlling, controlled by, or under common control with the issuing corporation is also considered an insider. It may be a case where a person whose relationship or former relationship to the issuer gives or gave him access to a fact of special significance about the issuer or the security that is not generally available, or a person who learns such a fact from any of the insiders with knowledge that the person from whom he learns the fact is such an insider. In insider trading, what is a fact of special significance? In insider trading, a fact of special significance is, in addition to being material, such fact as would likely, on being made generally available, to affect the market price of a security to a significant extent, or which a reasonable person would consider as specially important under the circumstances in determining his course of action in the light of such factors as the degree of its specificity, the extent of its difference from information generally available previously, and its nature and reliability. Still, I don't understand. What is the principal purpose of laws and regulations governing securities in the Philippines? The principal purpose of laws and regulations governing securities in the Philippines is to protect the public against the nefarious practices of unscrupulous brokers and salesmen in selling securities. What procedure must be followed under the SRC to authorize the sale or offer for sale or distribution of an investment contract? Before the investment contract is sold or offered for sale or distribution to the public in the Philippines, it should be registered with the SEC in accordance with Section 8 of the SRC. What are the legal consequences of failure to follow this procedure? The failure to follow this procedure has criminal consequences. It carries also civil liabilities in that the purchaser can recover from the seller the consideration paid with interest thereon, less the amount of any income received on the purchased securities upon the tender of such securities, or damages if the purchaser no longer owns such securities. Furthermore, the SEC may issue a cease and desist order. What are the requisites for valid proxy solicitation? It must be in writing. It must be signed by the stockholder or his duly authorized representative. It must be filed before the scheduled meeting with the corporate secretary. Can a stockbroker without license from the SEC recover management fees allegedly earned from handling the securities transaction of a client? No. An unlicensed person may not recover compensation for services as a broker where a statute or ordinance is applicable and such is of a regulatory nature. Define securities. Securities are shares, participation, or interest in a corporation or in a commercial enterprise or profit-making venture, and evidenced by a certificate, contract, instrument, whether written or electronic in character. What is a material non-public information? It is an information about the issuer or the security which has not been generally disclosed to the public and would likely affect the market price of the security after being disseminated to the public in the lapse of a reasonable time for the market to absorb the information, or would be considered by a reasonable person important under circumstances in determining his course of action whether to buy, sell, or hold the security. What are options? Options are contracts that give the buyer the right but not the obligation to buy or sell an underlying security at a predetermined price, called the exercise or strike price, on or before a predetermined date, called the expiry date, which can only be extended in accordance with exchange rules. Give at least 5 kinds of securities: shares of stock, bonds, debentures, notes, evidence of indebtedness, asset-backed securities, investment contracts, certificates of interest or participation in a profit-sharing agreement, certificates of deposit for a future subscription, fractional undivided interest in oil, gas, or other mineral rights, derivatives like options and warrants, certificates of assignment, certificates of participation, trust certificates, voting trust certificates, propriety or non-propriety membership certificates in corporation. That's more than 5. What are the exceptions to the general rule that all securities sold or offered for sale or distribution in the Philippines must be registered with the SEC? Exempt securities and securities covered by exempt transactions. Differentiate exempt securities and securities covered by exempt transaction. Exempt securities, those that may be sold or offered to the public without the required registration. Securities covered by exempt transactions are those whose sale need not be registered. Define marketing, the close, the buying and the selling of securities at the close of the market in an effort to alter the closing price of such securities. Define painting the tape. Involves a series of transactions in securities that are reported publicly to give the impression of activity or price movement in a security. Define boiler room operations. Refers to or refer to activities out of low rent offices and which use high pressure tactics, that is, direct mail, office and telephone follow-ups, typically involving misrepresentations concerning the securities being sold. What is an issuer? The originator, maker, obligor, or creator of the security. What is a broker? A person engaged in the business of buying and selling securities for the account of others. What is an exchange? It's an organized marketplace or facility that brings together buyers and sellers and executes trades of securities and or transactions. What is a wash sale? The operation of simultaneously buying and selling the same stock. Why is wash sale prohibited? There is no real exchange in beneficial ownership. What is a short sale? A contract of sale of shares of stock which the seller does not own or certificates which are not within his control, so as to be available for delivery at the time when delivery must be made. What is a stop-loss order? The instruction by a customer to his broker that if the commodity reaches the price named, the broker shall close the trade at the best available price, thus minimizing his losses. Enumerate the different kinds of option and define each. Put is a contract by which one of the parties thereto purchases a fixed sum, the privilege to sell a certain stock within a definite period of time. It gives the purchaser the right or the privilege to make the seller of the option buy from him a given number of shares of a named stock within a given time at a stipulated price. Call is an option or right to buy a certain amount of securities at a fixed price or within a certain time agreed on. It entitles the buyer the right to compel the seller or the option to deliver to him a certain number of shares within a given time at the stipulated price. Straddle means the double privilege of a put and a call, and secures to the holder the right to demand of the seller of the option to buy a certain price within a certain time at a certain number of specified stock, or to require him to take, that is, sell, at the same price within the same time the same shares of stock. It is not per se a gaming contract unless intended as a mere cover for a bet or wager on the future price of a stock commodity. What happens if the holder of an option does not exercise the same? If he does not exercise his option, he simply loses the price he paid for his option. True or false, it shall be unlawful for an insider to sell or buy a security of the issuer while in possession of material information with respect to the issuer or the security that is generally available to the public. Answer is false.